Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? Among the news items we have for you this week, the most historically accurate encounter you'll have on the Ark Encounter, contracting measles. The tattoos affect your immune system in ways we're just starting to understand, according to the conversation. Why it is that toothpaste makes orange juice taste somewhat disgusting, and the tinnitus will trigger your body's fight or flight response according to a study. And finally, a novel way of bonding two different metal objects that neither requires welding nor any real kind of heat. Rather, instead it relies on oscillation. The timestamps for these and other news items can be found in the description box below. We'll start with historical accuracy, and we mean actual historical accuracy, not just biblical bullshit. People who visited the Ark Encounter in Kentucky may well have, and probably have, acquired measles. This is great because nothing about the Ark is otherwise correct.
Noah, I want you to build an ark.
Right. What's an ark?
A large ship, 40 cubits by 80 cubits by 40 cubits.
Right. What's a cubit?
It's essentially a fanfiction made reality. But if we ignore the bullshit element of it, the actual site itself is a medical problem. Partly because it's a mecca for those who are anti-vaxxers, but also simply because, well, it has been a pandemic site, well, at least the site zero for a pandemic if things continue the way they have in America. As it is right now, the state of Kentucky in the USA has had to issue a notification, which effectively reads as follows. Health officials have identified potential measles exposures in Grant County, Kentucky. An unvaccinated out-of-state traveler stayed at the Holiday Inn and Suites in Dry Ridge from December 28th to 30th, 2025, and visited the Ark Encounter on December 29th, 2025. Measles is a highly contagious respiratory virus that can cause serious health complications, especially in young children. Okay, this is easy enough. As mentioned, this is probably the most historically accurate thing you would have happen at the Ark Encounter, simply because measles was a problem at the time, and unfortunately, there were no readily available treatments nor prophylaxis, like we have today with the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps and rubella. The first of those should be an obvious answer as to why it helps and stops, in many cases, measles.
And the animals came, 2 by 2, and were given poorly assigned rooms.
All right, lions, you'll be with the baby antelopes. Crocodiles, you're with the water-crossing wildebeests. Bats, you'll be with bugs. Seagulls, McDonald's wrappers. Pit bulls and city babies. And Christian Bale and annoying cameramen.
But no. And unfortunately, the Ark Encounter is also it's a lightning rod for anti-vaxxers and otherwise scientific illiterate people who insist upon attending the site. And unfortunately, in attending, they expose their children, who they are trying to make believe that the Ark was truly a real event, and that, no, the Bible is not just a group of fanfiction stories put together by somebody centuries if not millennia later, who decided that this was the true canon version of events. But yes, in a somewhat related news item, the USA has had an overhaul to the childhood vaccine schedule. That is, they've changed it from roughly 17 vaccines previously to now 11 vaccines that children should be getting, because Rfkraykray is an anti-vaxxer who has no idea about what's actually going to happen. The vaccines that they're withdrawing from use are flu, rotavirus, meningococcal ACWY, Hep B, and Hep A. Hepatitis A and B are there to protect kids from liver issues and damage. Understand, newborn children are especially vulnerable to damage to their liver. It's not fully formed, it's not able to cope with most harm, and if you start fucking with it, yeah, that's not a great place to go. And of course, the argument of, oh, well, hepatitis is only an issue if you contract it via sex or blood. No, there are other ways to be infected with hepatitis, so that's a complete nonsense argument. Meningococcal is another massive blow because although meningococcal itself isn't necessarily a big problem, it can cause encephalitis. In fact, it basically causes encephalitis, and that is a huge issue. That one will fuck with children's brains, to a huge extent. Rotavirus and flu, okay, we can see maybe an argument being made there. A dumb argument, but at least an argument that isn't complete bullshit. The HPV vaccine, okay, if you're going to a single dose, maybe, but The reality is simply that, well, generally speaking, you need at least 2 doses a certain time frame apart to get greatest efficacy. It'll still have some efficacy, it just won't be as good. And so we can basically say that this change in schedule is because Rfkraykray is dumb and doesn't want to take away all the vaccines right away to completely play his hand at how much of an idiot he is. And we're also very much likely to see a replay of Samoa after Rfkraykray did dumb shit there, but this time it's the USA, a developed first world country with a fairly robust medical system, even if it is ridiculously expensive. Moving on now, we have new treatments, which is perhaps a small bonus, let's say, something at least mildly pleasant this week. But the key here is that it's a new anti-cancer agent created by synthesizing something from fungus. It's also taken about 50 years to do so because a lot of the synthesis process is not easy to do. Theoretically, you can synthesize anything with enough time, effort, and money, but doing so on a scale for it to be an efficacious medication? No, that one's the challenge here, and so that's why it's taken so long. This is where it brings us to producing verticillin, or verticillin A to be specific. The key finding was a rework on the approach MIT chemist Mohammad Musfaghi used before to synthesize similar compounds. The only difference was just a few atoms within it, and by being able to make those atoms change the way they want them to, we now have this medication as and when wanted, or at least we can produce it on a scale where it's not so ridiculously expensive that it's going to screw with everybody and force you to sell your children off to the salt mines. The reason why this particular medication is useful is that we're able to look at, say, gliomas, aggressive brain cancers, where it's particularly useful, and similar other cancers where previously we didn't have effective options that weren't not necessarily dangerous or harmful, but they were very aggressive in what they did, meaning there was a lot of harm across the body. Next we go to the effects of being tattooed, and not necessarily being given a number and sent to the showers, which is obviously a very negative effect, nor the social stigma in modern sense of being tattooed across your body, but actual immunological changes that occur in your body as a result of having a tattoo. And it's not just a single tattoo that's small and innocuous, whether it's, say, some sort of memorial tattoo to deceased people you know, or some sort of a fan image. Essentially, you're some sort of crazy person who thinks that putting Sonic the Hedgehog or similar on you is a great idea. But unfortunately, the growing evidence would indicate that no, tattoos, at least the inks that are largely used, although that is changing somewhat over time, are not as inert as initially thought. The previous position was that tattoo ink, for the most part, stays where it's injected to but will break down due to exposure to light. Newer research has shown that no, that's not entirely true, that the tattoo will break down and therefore you'll lose pigmentation, but as a result, various leukocytes, that's the immune cells, will come along and pick it up and take it away. And this is where the pigments become particularly important. A number of the inks currently available, in fact a fair number of them, contain what are called trace amounts, that's tiny amounts of heavy metals. This includes nickel, chromium, and cobalt, and in very rare cases, lead. These heavy metals, at a high enough dose, it can become toxic. And of course, they're well known for triggering allergic reactions and immune sensitivity. This is the problem here. However, things do get somewhat worse for the tattoo industry, as you also have azo dyes. These are synthetic colorants widely used for textiles and plastics, but they can break down, and when they break down, they turn into aromatic amines. These are chemicals linked to cancer and genetic damage, at least in laboratory study. Then you have the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, often shortened to PAHs. These are produced during the incomplete burning of organic material and are found in soot, vehicle exhaust, and charred food. Black tattoo ink is commonly made from carbon black and may contain these compounds, some of which are classified as carcinogenic. And finally, we have the coloured inks, particularly where you have red, yellow, and orange, are more frequently associated with allergic reactions and chronic inflammation, partly due to the metal salts and the azopigments that degrade into potentially toxic aromatic amines. So yes, this is all a fairly negative sign for what's going on, and of course it's a further issue as to what's actually happening. First of all, you inject the tattoo dye deeper into your skin typically. This means that it has to go somewhere. It does diffuse somewhat. and as a result of it diffusing somewhat, well, it works its way, first of all, into deeper tissues, and then eventually into the lymph nodes. The lymph nodes then accumulate these dyes, and unfortunately that's the first sign you have a problem. If you want a full and completer understanding of what's going on, we have a whole video dedicated to this topic, and you'll find it linked in the top right and in the description box below. Next we go on to the more curious side of dental health. That is, why does the mint in toothpaste make your mouth feel cold? And for that matter, things like chewing gum and similar that tend to use mint as a flavouring or aromatic compound. The answer is surprisingly simple. Menthol is a natural compound, and because it comes from mint, primarily from mint anyway, there are other plant sources, but it creates a feeling of cold through TRPM8 receptors on nerve endings in your mouth. These are the same receptors responsible for sensing cold. Menthol activates these, which tells your brain, hey, this thing is cold, but chemically cold, not physically cold, which is a weird way for the things to line up the way they have. It's simply a random chance that a surprisingly pleasant smelling compound, depending on who you ask, is also the same sort of compound that can then activate a specific receptor that's associated with a specific thing in our brain, in this case, cold. The process of simply breathing, drinking, and similar spreads this menthol as it gets diffused across your mouth, causing your mouth to feel like it's even more cold again, which is why the receptors work the way they do. Further, the receptors remain open and primed to sense further cold, so any liquid or air that is somewhat cool will activate them and feel significantly colder than it is at that time. While a weird aside to include in the research, we do have the curious study that says that if you take a menthol mouthwash and you use that when, say, doing a fast run over a shortish distance of 5 kilometers or roughly 3 miles, you're able to improve your running speed temporarily, as the runners who were involved in the study felt cooler as a result. Now, why and how this works and whether or not it's going to be considered doping in future sports is a different matter, but still, it's curious to see that it happens. In related news, we have the question of why it is that toothpaste particularly, but really anything minty, makes things like orange juice, coffee, and similar taste terrible if you were to consume them after brushing your teeth, and also makes clear why you should consume these things and then brush your teeth. The short answer is that toothpaste particularly, but the mintiness in toothpaste contains a detergent. That detergent will dissolve fat, and since taste buds are partially made of fat, they are disrupted whenever you brush your teeth. So, no, don't stop brushing your teeth. Just be aware that the disruption that occurs is temporary and should only last a few minutes, sometimes up to half an hour. In short, brushing your teeth removes the necessary lipids that maintain some of the moderation in your taste bud receptors, and as a result, simply consuming orange juice, which is somewhat acidic, overstimulates them and causes you to think that they taste terrible, and certainly disrupts how your body recognizes the flavor. Shifting now to more clinical news, we need to talk about one protein that it could be, and we're very hesitant to say this, a better predictor of heart disease than, say, cholesterol and similar lipids. Understand, cholesterol is the primary thing responsible for, say, atherosclerosis, plaques in your arteries, but it's not the only thing that's involved in it. There's a whole chain of events that need to happen for that to occur. It's kind of like, say, bankruptcy. Getting to the point where you have to declare bankruptcy, outside of America where getting sick will cause it, you need to make a long series of bad decisions. But this isn't the only thing that could be causing you to have a heart attack. In fact, there's something called C-reactive protein. The C-reactive protein is used as a measure, let's say, of heart damage when you have a heart attack. But what it is kind of important because it's not just a thing that exists randomly. C-reactive protein is created by the liver in response to infections, tissue damage, chronic inflammation, and various other states like autoimmune diseases and metabolic disturbances. So if you're obese or diabetic, you would have C-reactive protein present. It's basically a flag saying, this person is not healthy, do something about it. But because it's inside the blood, no one will ever know it's there until you go to an emergency room and say, I think I'm having a heart attack. C-reactive protein can, however, be measured, and it is measured, and you don't even need anything particularly special. It's like you have to go to a doctor's office or a hospital saying, yeah, I'm having a heart attack. You can get it tested with standard blood tests. you should expect to see somewhere under 1 milligram per deciliter. A deciliter is 10 litres, just so you understand, and it's a weird standard measurement for blood. This signifies minimal inflammation in the body, which is good. That tells you that the body's reasonably well. If it's more than 3 milligrams per deciliter, it indicates that there's elevated levels of inflammation, and this is where the increased risk of heart disease occurs. More than half of the Americans have this, and then again, more than half of the Americans look like they should be Shamu and find themselves in some sort of aquarium, or a fish tank. This is not to say that cholesterol, obesity, etc. aren't going to be important, because they are. It's just that if you're after a measure that could be more accurately relied on to indicate the relative impending nature of something like a heart attack, C-reactive protein might be better, and might be in a very broad sense, let's say. Moving on now to tinnitus, that annoying ringing in your ears. Not when you're trying to ignore someone or if there's a mosquito around, but actual ringing in your ears. And it increases stress levels because you can't make the stupid noise go away. What else is interesting is that it may be activating your fight or flight response by being a sound. Admittedly, this is based on studies of facial expressions of people with and without tinnitus, so we're a little bit hesitant to say this actually means anything to the effect of what's claimed. But at the same time, it is at least more interesting to learn about that maybe there's some relationship between tinnitus and human survival, or at least humans thinking they're going to survive. The researchers catalogued facial movement of the tinnitus testing participants, and they found that people with the debilitating chronic tinnitus experience heightened vigilance, and they react to normal everyday sounds as though they were threats. It effectively means that tinnitus may be a sign that your body is simply at the precipice of being activated for some sort of threat. Whether it's, say, people coming to your door trying to sell religion, other people trying to get you to sign up for an MLM, or an actual lion, tiger, bear, the usual candidates when we talk about threats and the fight or flight response. Although interesting, we do have problems with the study, and the biggest is simply its size, which we recognise is going to be limited by a range of factors, but even then, you only have 47 individuals with tinnitus, or at least sound sensitivity, and 50 without, and essentially they've done a comparison. Does this group show these things, and does this group show these things? And their micro-expressions, which themselves are, let's say, academically debatable. In a similar piece of news that might be just as hotly debated, we have an argument being made that jellyfish sleep like humans do, and that it could provide an explanation for the origins of sleep. Jellyfish are arguably something truly basic, not just because they are effectively protein sacs filled with water. They are, but they do have a very rudimentary brain. They do also, strangely enough, not have an anus, which does somewhat detract from the argument that opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one. We presume jellyfish have opinions, but they don't have assholes. The jellyfish will spend about a third of every day sleeping effectively. Now, this is bizarre to say, but it does somewhat indicate the origins of sleep could be even more ancient than currently thought. To be clear about it, if we were to, let's say, draw the family tree of everything on Earth and look at where humans and jellyfish somewhat come back to a common ancestor, it's about 1 billion years ago. But this billion-year-old species doesn't have a centralized brain. They have a neural network, like jellyfish, but, yeah. The other question, though, is if, like jellyfish, they have a diffused or distributed nervous system that runs the length of their body, what need does it have for sleep, after all? It's not like it's operating on memory or similar. Rather, it seems to be doing so for rest and relaxation. And the only reason we're reasonably sure this is happening is because there are periods of immobility and decreased arousal. And this obviously comes with risk, so there has to be a cause for it in jellyfish. After all, you don't want to be eaten by something, somewhere, somehow. Well, most of the time. The researchers believe that in part it's that neuronal DNA is damaged when the sea anemones, jellyfish, and we presume humans, are deprived of sleep. And the researchers are able to observe this under both laboratory and natural conditions. This would indicate that DNA is a major factor in why it is that, well, species sleep. Also, it was observed that jellyfish will sleep more if the environment caused neuronal DNA damage for some reason. This would indicate that, for some reason, sleep is directly related to maintaining neuron health and well-being. If you treat jellyfish with melatonin, the animals would also sleep more and DNA damage was subsequently reduced. This only supports the argument to some extent. And finally, if they use, say, ultraviolet radiation or mutagens and increased neural damage, it basically gave a greater pressure for the jellyfish to sleep. Shifting now, we can look at technology news and specifically a novel way of trying to bond two different metal products. Let's say if you're trying to fuse beams for construction or something similar, using a a heat-based method, although technically not quite. What they've done is use oscillatory forces to bond together two pieces of fine wire. This is, say, similar to friction welding in a way. That is, by taking two pieces of metal, spinning them at high speed, and slamming them into each other, the force of them grinding on each other creates friction and therefore heat, and they melt together. It works well enough in some cases, but it's not always perfect. In the same way that if you want to create, say, finely structured things, you don't really have a way to do that easily with welding torches and similar. The simple reality is that it's quite difficult. Getting into those fine areas of it and being able to apply heat and not melt other structures is bad. And then, of course, you have the idea of, say, deposition and then fusing it using heat via sintering. Now, this works if you're building up a product, but again, it has limitations, let's call them. But in this case, by essentially creating ultrasonic waves, there's a way to reduce the energy needed for a piece of metal to undergo the process of bonding to another piece of metal. And by doing it this way, you're able to more efficiently, arguably, bond together two pieces of metal in a way that allows you to create final products that are helpful. Now, whether this is, say, something like sintering, where you have a very specific, very localized application of heat, whether you're trying to weld something, or other methods again that are either additive or subtractive production methods, it would still allow for the metal shaping and joining to be performed in a more energy efficient way. And possibly if we do this in space, where there's much less friction and similar, you might theoretically be able to create giant shipyards that produce spaceships on a large scale more efficiently. But that takes this technology, research, development, whatever you wish to call it, and runs with it to an extreme extent. The final news item we have for you is less a case of actual news so much as a gross misunderstanding. It claims that the Large Hadron Collider is being shut down. This is technically true, but not entirely, and why the subtitle of "It's Time to Wind Down" isn't entirely accurate. What's happening is the Large Hadron Collider is being temporarily shut down as a planned break from about mid-2026 to around 2030. During this time, another major upgrade will occur. As a result, all they're really doing is servicing it and adding new components. Admittedly, these new components will make it much more powerful and produce more particle collisions, and theoretically bring us ever closer to the black hole consuming Europe. The claims that it's the end of physics and similar are just plain silly. Admittedly, silly for ignorant reasons rather than malice, but even then it's kinda dumb to think that a facility as large, as expensive, and as well used as the Large Hadron Collider is and the sheer effort CERN puts into it, would just be closed down without more fanfare is stupid. And that's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, and please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.